In the summer of 2017, a prominent American visited the island of Okinawa, Japan.
Yes. Welcome to back Okinawa. Yes. Great to see you again.
William Perry served as the American Secretary of Defense some 20 years ago.
Nice.
Perry was deeply involved with the North Korean nuclear crisis and the disposition of U.S. bases in Okinawa, national security issues that continue to concern U.S.-Japanese relations.
We were on the brink of taking actions which could have led to a Second Korean War. Going through my mind is it could be a catastrophe for North Korea to get nuclear weapons. Okinawa has a key air base and a key marine base that would be in absolutely the front line of any conflict with North Korea. We always considered what can we do to keep the capability that we feel is vital while lessening the negative impact on the Okinawan people.
The agreement Perry signed 20 years ago to return a U.S. base to Japan has yet to be implemented. What took place between the U.S. and Japan? One of the key decision makers reveals his thinking for the first time.
Everybody loses. Sooner or later, I hope we come back to looking at that problem objectively and coming to a serious solution to it.
What is the legacy of that era? And what are the prospects for the future? In August 2017, we were invited to visit Perry at his home.
Oh, hello, Taco. Welcome to my home. Please come in.
Yes, sir. How are you?
I'm very good.
Perry is now 90 years old. He still teaches at the prestigious Stanford University and remains prominent in American national security circles.
I don't much recently, but I did for many years. President Clinton and myself taken.
For 3 years, from 1994 until early 1997,
The cabinet.
he served as Secretary of Defense under President Bill Clinton.
Myself and Secretary Christopher Outstanding.
We first contacted Perry 2 years earlier with the request to hear from him the lessons about war and peace he has learned during his long career.
You know, for a guy who makes his living talking.
As a result, we were allowed to interview him for a total of 20 hours and to accompany him on a 5-day trip to Okinawa.
Why do you decide to take this interview now?
I think the greatest danger in the world today is the danger of a nuclear catastrophe. And there are many things we can do to lower the probability of that catastrophe, but our governments are not doing it. And our governments are not doing it because the people do not understand how dangerous this is. As a consequence of that, the world has gotten much more dangerous. And I believe that I have a special mission to try to educate the world on how dangerous it is so we can take steps to back away from these movements we're making that are causing the world to be so dangerous. This was on a Friday morning. It wasn't a phone call, it was a phone call to come meet with him. And then when I met with him, he told me he wanted me to be a Secretary of Defense. I've never had a job in which I felt the decisions I made were so important to so many people.
Thank you very much.
He's also a principal advisor on national security matters to the President, along, of course, with the Secretary of State. He's responsible for the oversight of a couple million people between the soldiers, sailors, and Marines and the civilian personnel. One of the things the Secretary of Defense does is sign the deployment orders, which send all U.S. forces overseas. No force, no single soldier is sent overseas unless the Secretary of Defense has signed an authorization for him to do so. I felt very heavily that responsibility, not only for its global consequences, but also for its impact on individual soldiers and sailors and Marines that are sent into battle.
Soon after becoming Defense Secretary, Perry confronted a crisis that had the potential to fully destabilize East Asia. It was sparked by North Korea's effort to develop nuclear weapons. After the end of the Cold War, an isolated North Korea secretly began to develop nuclear weapons. When the problem was discovered, North Korea resisted international intervention and engaged in provocation toward the U.S. and South Korea.
I knew that it was a serious crisis in the spring of 1994, which is just 2 months after I became secretary. What went through my mind is it could be a catastrophe for North Korea to get nuclear weapons. First of all, they might use them, most obviously. But secondly, it could stimulate both Japan and South Korea to want to have nuclear weapons themselves as an offset to North Korea's nuclear weapons. And that, in turn, could stimulate China to want to have more nuclear weapons to offset Japan and South Korea. In other words, it would stimulate an Asian nuclear arms race. And my recommendation of the president at the time is that we should not permit that to happen. And he authorized me to state publicly we would not permit it to happen, which I did. The response in North Korea was an article in the North Korean press calling Secretary of Defense Perry a war maniac. You remember something like that. When you're called a war maniac, it sticks in your head. What we were trying to do was prevent a war, certainly to prevent a nuclear war.
Perry considered an airstrike against the North Korean nuclear facilities and was prepared to send 10,000 reinforcements to South Korea. Tensions rapidly increased.
As I told President Clinton, it's a danger. We had to choose between the possibility of a very bad reaction on the North Koreans, which could lead to some military conflict, and between letting them having a nuclear capability, which would be, I thought, a catastrophe. So there was no good choices here. We had to choose between two bad choices. We were on the brink of taking actions which could have led to a Second Korean War, which we considered that a low probability, but not zero.
In preparation for the possible outbreak of hostilities, Perry believed it was essential to obtain Japanese consent to the use of American bases in the country.
Because that obviously would have made those bases in Japan subject to an attack by the North Korean Air Force. So it seemed to me completely appropriate that he be informed of that and have an opportunity to say no. The answer was yes, they would make the base available to us. But I was specifically asked not to discuss this publicly. So it was clear that the Prime Minister had some concern about public reaction to this. Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister didn't seem to be focused on military issues. It was not a high priority for either one of them, and that was a matter of concern to me as well. I think it was a wake-up call in Japan. It was also a wake-up call in the United States as to what our relationship to Japan ought to be.
The crisis of war was averted at the last moment by successful diplomatic negotiations. However, Perry decided to re-examine the U.S.-Japan alliance in light of possible conflict with North Korea. Among the people involved in this process, one Okinawan man stood out in particular. The man was Masahide Ota, then governor of Okinawa Prefecture and a staunch opponent of American bases on the island. Perry met with Ota on a number of occasions when the governor visited the U.S. The two men debated the problem of the U.S. bases face to face. Perry had promised to see Ota for the first time in 20 years on his trip to Okinawa. However, Ota died suddenly in June 2017, 3 months before Perry's trip, and the two men were unable to meet.
One of the things I did was I made what I considered a personal friendship with the governor of Okinawa, who was considered to be anti-American. Governor Ohta, I think his name was. And we had several meaningful talks, discussions, not just about solving official problems, but just sort of philosophical talks. And I found him to be a very intelligent and a very warm person. So, yes, I'm very sorry that he died. I'd hoped to be able to see him in our visit over there and renew our old friendship.
The debate between the two men began over a security strategy that the U.S. published in February 1995. 1 year after the North Korean crisis, the U.S. announced its intention to continue basing 100,000 troops in the region. Governor Ohta objected to this policy.
沖縄の県民が過去50年間基地を減らしてくれ、なくしてくれって言ってきたその強い人間的な要求っていうのは一体どうなるのかと、アメリカの偉い役人がですね、テーブルを前にして作って戦略報告を出しているわけですが、その人の頭の中にですね、沖縄で現実に暮らしているその100万以上の生身の人間がですね、そこで生活しているということを一度でも考えたことがあるのかなという。
I had a positive view of Governor Ohta. I think it might in some way be natural to look at him as the enemy because he was trying to kick us out of Okinawa, basically. But it was easy to understand where he came from. It was easy to empathize with his view. I believed we had to start on that problem by trying to understand where the Okinawan people and government were coming from. He had been involved in the Great War, and so he came from a different background than I had, since my involvement was peripheral, really after the war.
Governor Ohta had survived the Battle of Okinawa, the largest land battle of the Pacific War. For his part, Perry had witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by that battle. Until Okinawa was annexed by Japan in the late 19th century, it was an independent nation that thrived on intermediate trade in the Asian region. However, at the end of the Pacific War, Japan fought a war of attrition there as a means of buying time before the invasion of the mainland. More than 200,000 people, including civilians, lost their lives. Right after the war, Perry was stationed on Okinawa as a soldier in the Army Corps of Engineers.
My view of Okinawa had been based by the almost a year that I spent there in 1946 and 1947. And the job I had there was do a surveying of the island of Okinawa to make up modern maps to the island, and that was the first step towards the rebuilding and reconditioning of the island. So I figured my job was part of the reconstruction of Okinawa. And we were standing on the deck when we pulled into the city of Naha, and I could hardly believe it. I don't believe there was a building left standing in Naha. The southern part of Okinawa was completely destroyed. Not just Naha, not just the capital, the whole southern part of Okinawa. But you could easily sense the devastation of the people who survived. The people who survived but had a husband or a wife or a mother or a father killed in the war. And the people who had what we now call post-traumatic stress. We didn't have a name for it then, but the people who were emotionally, profoundly affected by the war. I saw all of that. I saw it firsthand.
On the land mapped by Perry and his fellow engineers, towns were rebuilt and people's lives were restored. At the same time, American military bases were built, and these bases clashed with the livelihood of the Okinawan people. It was 50 years after his duty on Okinawa that Perry encountered this reality in its extremity.
今月4日、沖縄本島北部でアメリカ兵3人が小学生の女の子を車で連れ去り乱暴した事件で、沖縄県警察本部は今日午前、婦女暴行の疑いでアメリカ軍の捜査機関に身柄を拘束されている3人の逮捕状を那覇地方裁判所沖縄支部に請求しました。身柄を拘束されているのは在中アメリカ海兵隊の隊員3人です。
Public sentiment in Okinawa erupted. Demonstrations demanding the removal of the American bases swelled to an unprecedented scale.
私たちに静かな沖縄を返してください。軍隊のない悲劇のない平和な島を返してください。
今度はアメリカ政府と我が政府が協力する番ですよと。でなければ我々はこれまでの通りにはいきませんよということもはっきり申し上げてきたわけでございます。
The incident occurred just as the Japan-U.S. security relationship was undergoing the process of review.
Well, there were two different levels of reaction. One of them was just a personal reaction, trying to imagine the horror of this action and being disgusted at the soldier who had implemented it, carried it out, and a great feeling of sorrow for the family of the girl. And then on an objective level, I was concerned what it would do to our treaty with Japan, our cooperation with Japan, because I was fully aware that we could not provide for the defense of Japan unless that cooperation were done ahead of time and maintained ahead of time.
U.S. officials began to search for a path to break through the tense situation. Their attention came to focus on Marine Corps Air Station Futenma in central Okinawa. The U.S. military already had concerns over the viability of the Futenma base, which was surrounded by residential neighborhoods and faced operational restrictions. They were considering the necessity of replacing the base.
The primary purpose of Futenma is to serve as a base for rapid reinforcement of our troops in South Korea in the event of an attack from North Korea. Principal capability at Futenma are the Marines and the air unit goes with them. And they are capable of being First wave of them are capable of being in South Korea in a day's time, ready to fight. But even if all of the troops and all of the aircraft went to South Korea in a few days, it also has to serve as a base for reinforcement, as air units come from Alaska, from the United States, from Hawaii. And so we never considered just giving up the base. We always considered, what can we do to keep the capability that we feel is vital while lessening the negative impact on the Okinawan people. If we're moving the base, there's an opportunity actually to make some improvement in capability as well as solving the encroachment problem. All of that is wrapped together in any serious consideration of Futenma.
To renew the functionality of the bases in preparation for the outbreak of hostilities on the Korean Peninsula, while reducing the burden on the Okinawan people. This was the thinking behind Perry's plan to replace the Futenma base. How would this plan be placed on the political agenda in Japan and the US? 2 months after the 1995 rape incident, Perry explained his plan to a leading Japanese politician. Liberal Democratic Party leader Ryutaro Hashimoto was then serving as Minister of International Trade and Industry. He was considered a likely candidate for Prime Minister in the near future.
The meeting was unofficial. We did not meet in his office, which was a trade office. He came to meet me in my hotel room, which was very unusual, and had little to do with trade issues, which he was theoretically responsible for. He was, I believe, looking forward to becoming Prime Minister, and he was trying to get a better understanding of the U.S.-Japan issues. We talked about North Korea's problems. We talked about the troop reinforcement plans. I went over with him the same strategy that I discussed with you about how the United States would mobilize to fight a war with North Korea if we ever had to do that.
Did you talk to me about Futenma?
Yes. Oh, yes. I don't remember the details of what we talked about, but he knew about the issue, and he knew we were discussing it. And I discussed with him in the simplest possible terms, namely pointing out the importance of the base, but our concern about the encroachment problem and our desire to try to solve that encroachment problem for the people in Okinawa.
3 months later, newly installed Prime Minister Hashimoto visited California for his first Japan-US Leaders Summit. For the first time in diplomatic history, the matter of the return of the Futenma base came under discussion. Hashimoto is said to have made a spur-of-the-moment decision to raise the issue.
どうしたものかなというのは本当に迷いました。ところが半分ぐらいのところで、橋本本当にそれだけか、もっとあるんじゃないのか、遠慮しないで出せよっていうのを彼の方から言ってくれた。そこでとっさの判断として、その現地から出てきている問題、それは普天間基地の返還という問題があると。あなたがそれを聞いてくれたから、私はここでそのテーブルの上に乗せると。
It came across as the natural confluence of Clinton and Hashimoto's thinking. But Perry had prepared the ground in advance.
I briefed him on the problem, on the importance of keeping a military base, and on our willingness to move the base if the Japanese government wanted to move it. It was no surprise to me because that was one of the major issues which Prime Minister Hashimoto, then Senator Hashimoto, raised to me when he met with me before he became Prime Minister. So I fully expected him to bring it up at that meeting. And because of my expectation, I briefed President Clinton on my discussion with him. So President Clinton should not have been surprised.
2 months later, in April 1996, the U.S. and Japan agreed that the Futenma base would be returned. At the same time, a joint declaration on Japan-U.S. security relations was issued, as Perry had envisioned. The declaration expanded the scope of the security relationship from East Asia to the entire Asia-Pacific region. It also called for a review of defense cooperation guidelines and increased Japanese logistical support for the U.S. military. The alliance had taken a step to enhance military cooperation to respond to regional contingencies. But there were unresolved issues. As a condition for the return of the Futenma base, a replacement facility would have to be built within Okinawa. But where, and on what scale? The negotiations bogged down. Around this time, Governor Ohta sent a letter to Secretary Perry. "Dear Sir," he wrote, "in justifying the American military presence on our soil, both the governments of Japan and the United States have repeatedly emphasized the importance of the Japan-U.S. strategic alliance. We Okinawans understand all of this perfectly well, but we alone are made to bear the brunt of the American military presence in Japan. 3/4 of the U.S. bases and nearly 2/3 of U.S. troops in Japan are in Okinawa, although our prefecture is less than 1% of the entire Japanese territory. We hope to use our land more creatively in ways that will be beneficial for humanity."
Yes, I remember the letter well. In my judgment, the base we had in Okinawa was beneficial for humanity, and it was preventing a war. What could be more beneficial to humanity than that? So I strongly disagree to that part of the letter. But what he says here, we in Okinawa feel that the Japanese-U.S. strategic alliance is so imperative to mutual interest that the rest of Japan must share in the responsibility of supporting the alliance. That was really his fundamental point. And he made that point to me, both in letters and personally, many times. And I sympathize with the view on that. But that was not an issue for me to decide.
On the location of the replacement facility, Perry says he was forced to compromise. Perry himself believed the best option was to move the base outside of Okinawa.
The location was a choice of the government of Japan, not the United States. From our point of view, it could have been anywhere in Japan.
But in the Sapporo report, end of '96, stated that it has to be within Okinawa. So what was the reason for that?
I don't agree with that reason. I think it's convenient to be in Okinawa. The mission is well served by being in Okinawa, but the mission could also be served by being in another Japanese island. We looked at other places when I was still Secretary of Defense. We, meaning a Japanese-American team, were looking at them. And the Japanese had very little enthusiasm for going to other places. But it was explicitly brought up and explicitly discussed. And as I said, there were no mission reasons why I could not be moved to another location. But somebody at Hashimoto's level or Clinton's level have to consider other factors too. They have to consider economics, logistics, and political factors. And I appreciate those considerations, but that wasn't what I was looking at. I was looking at the mission.
Eight months after the agreement to return the Futenma base, the U.S. and Japanese governments agreed on a planned replacement facility. The plan entailed building an offshore facility in the waters off the east coast of the main island of Okinawa. The plan would avoid filling in the sea and would build a structure that could later be removed in deference to Okinawan concerns over construction of a permanent base. However, Perry points out that this plan faced a major problem. This was the decision to deploy MV-22 Osprey aircraft at some point in the future at the facility that would replace Futenma. A military document read, "The new airfield must also be capable of supporting planned changes to the operational forces currently at Futenma, i.e., the planned transition of CH-46 squadrons to the MV-22. No capability should be lost as a result of the move." The Osprey was considered an ideal new technology that combined the vertical takeoff and landing capability of a helicopter with the flight speed of a fixed-wing aircraft. However, the aircraft suffered numerous accidents during its development, and it was plagued by safety concerns. The Japanese side was not made aware of the Osprey plans at the time of the April agreement, and they were at a loss as to how to explain this to the Japanese public. On the American side, the military wanted to use the planned Osprey deployment as their rationale for building a larger platform.
That question, I read this memo before. I think this memo to me implied there was already a feeling of distrust building up on the various sides of the meeting, which is probably one reason we never got very far. Oh, the V-22 was already, we knew about the V-22 at that time. We weren't quite sure what year it would be operational or how many we would have. There were a lot of unknowns about it. But in our planning, we would have to accommodate that there would be a V-22 sometime in the reasonably near future, and that we would have somewhat different requirements.
Okinawan authorities were not informed about the planned deployment of Ospreys to the replacement base. This reference to the basing of Ospreys in the draft report was deleted when the report was made public.
That was a bad decision, I think. It suggests that a dishonesty was already existing on the American side, which was not only not correct, it was not useful. Sooner or later, somebody's going to learn about the V-22, and then they not only have the objective arguments to bring in, but they have the argument to say that you were deceiving us, you were not telling us the truth.
You said it's a bad decision to scratch it off from the report, but it was also under your name, so it wasn't really communicated to you, or?
No. I didn't realize at the time that such a big issue was being made over the V-22. Had I realized it, I would have intervened and tried to get the issues straightened out.
Governor Ohta paid close attention to the Japan-U.S. talks. A year after the agreement to build the offshore facility, he announced his opposition to the construction. Ohta gathered information from independent sources and began to suspect that Ospreys would be deployed at the new facility.
So the issue that Governor Ohta had was only partly a technical issue. I think it was primarily an issue of trust. And on that, I think he was right.
And that kind of building up of distrust can contribute to the drifting.
It can. And I think when I read this memo again, it makes it easier to understand why things drifted away instead of drifting together.
how should the issue of the replacement facility be resolved? The Japanese government and Okinawa Prefecture have continued to talk, but a mutually acceptable agreement has yet to be reached. More than 20 years have passed since the agreement was made to return Futenma. The base remains where it was, still in operation.
What do you feel?
It's very hard to say. Maybe I can think of the base in objective terms, what it's here for, what it's meant to do, its role in deterring North Korea. Then you think of the subjective terms. What if the deterrence doesn't work? What if that turns out to be a war? Then this base becomes a swarm of activity. New troops coming in, new airplanes coming in, flights from here into the combat zone. And then the other subjective thing is that the people who live around the base, who are affected by it one way in peacetime, will be affected a very different way in the wartime. And so I feel frustrated. Because we had it in our hands and we let it go. It's like an outfielder in baseball who catches the ball and then jerks his hand one way and the ball drops to the ground. That's what happened here. It was in a mitt and we let it drop to the ground.
And nobody picked it up?
Not in 21 years, no.
Nope.
But it's still possible.
How did Governor Ohta see the current state of affairs in Okinawa? Perry paid a visit to a research institute that Ohta himself established late in his life.
Hello. My name is Hideaki Ota. I'm the son of Masahide Ota.
My grandfather made you.
Yes. Welcome back.
I have great respect for your father.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for many messages that you said.
How do you do?
Nice
Very
to
good
see
to
you.
meet you. My
It's
pleasure.
an honor and pleasure.
My honor. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. How do you guys get here?
Very good to see you.
Welcome
My
to
honor to
Okinawa.
meet you.
さあ、どうぞ。
Yes.
Good.
A part of Ohta's life work was to create an archive of materials from the Battle of Okinawa. Ohta believed deeply that people should never forget Okinawa's point of departure at the end of the war.
Shuri Castle was this area, where the Shuri Castle was. You can just see the destruction everywhere you look. This is pretty much what it looked like when I came here in 1946.
So this is where he kept working till his last moments.
Ohta was looking forward to Perry's visit. He wanted Perry to see all of the remaining American bases. And he wanted him to consider once again the path Okinawa had taken through history. He expressed these hopes before his death.
You look like your father.
Oh, thank you very much. Many people say that.
Yeah, I had no trouble recognizing you right away.
Oh, really?
How old was he when he died?
He died on his birthday. He just turned 92.
Yeah. I think he was a year or two older than I was.
And he was very proud and pleased to have this open relationship so that he could have a direct communication with the key decision makers in the United States. And obviously you were one of the more important and open people that he had a relationship with.
And being here today, Governor Ohta, what would have been telling him from you?
So I think I would have told him I was frustrated that the plan which I put together, which was heavily influenced by my discussion with him, was never implemented. Although the second thing I would have told him is that, but it's still not too late. So I came over here feeling the responsibility of maintaining that deterrence and trying to find a way of maintaining it with the minimum encroachment, the minimum problems created to the civilian population around the bases.
If Ohta-san was here, he would say many things, I think. But bases are basically the target of attack from North Korea or any enemy, first place. So he was opposed to the construction of military bases, period. But the bases surrounded by enmity of the Okinawan people are not sustainable. So I think it's very important for the U.S. government to be more concerned instead of saying, well, it's a Japanese problem.
I talked about both of those issues with Governor Ohta, and I told him that I fully agreed with him on his concern, and I was willing to work with him to try to relieve some of that burden. We proposed different locations outside of Okinawa. We looked at them. But the only ones we could come to an agreement on was moving it to the northern part of Okinawa. We even looked at taking off the island altogether. We looked at offshore, artificial islands.
Artificial.
I still think that balancing everything, taking everything into account, that the plan which we proposed was a reasonable plan, and you'd be much better off today had it been implemented.
The offshore base option favored by Perry and his team was abandoned, and Japan and the U.S. later agreed to a new construction plan. It calls for building a landfill at a marine base in northern Okinawa and constructing 2 runways in a V configuration. The landfill operation began in April 2017. Public opinion polls in Okinawa show that about 70% of the population is opposed to this plan. A sit-in at the construction site has continued for more than 3 years. The Okinawan government is officially opposed to the plan. As the Japanese government presses ahead with the construction, the standoff continues.
For ancestors.
I'm surprised there are more people here just enjoying it. If this was the United States, there would be 1,000 people out here having picnics and swimming. I can see why people don't want to change. Easy to understand that.
One of the issues Governor Ohta staked his political life on was opposition to the construction of a new base. He wrote, "If I had political ambitions and had become governor by the normal process, I might have been inclined to accept the new base. However, I entered politics and became governor as an extension of my research on the Battle of Okinawa and my study of Japan-US negotiations over the base problem. What stopped me was the weight of Okinawa's history. The biggest factor was the great sacrifice of the islanders during the Battle of Okinawa."
Or just adds to the frustration that I felt when we were looking at the Futenma base. You don't solve problems by ignoring them, and we've ignored this now for several decades. Yeah.
William Perry's journey to Okinawa came to an end. The people of Okinawa fear they will be swept up in war because of the presence of the American bases. Perry believes that the bases serve as a deterrence that prevents war. Can these two perspectives reach a mutual understanding?
See you again.
What is our responsibility in the face of this issue?
And I saw my role as being a bridge. They were far apart then and they're far apart now, which means somebody has to be a bridge between them. But you should understand, though, Taka, that I was a bridge not because of a sentimental attachment to Okinawa, although I had one. That wasn't why I was trying to be the bridge. It was because I believed I was responsible in the U.S. for the mission, military mission. And I truly believed then that we could accomplish the military mission better if we were doing it without thrusting ourselves upon the people of Okinawa. There is a common ground. But that common ground will only be reached if both of the sides are willing to listen to the other side. I think there was a failure to do that today for the last 21 years. That's so fundamental. It's so fundamental. It's hard for me to understand why people don't see how important that is. And what we have here in Futenma is a clear example of how not having been able to bridge that issue, reach across the aisle, understand the other person, we end up with a solution which is worse for all points of view. Everybody loses. So that's what my advice to them would be, is to don't give up on it.